All this month, we've been having on Fridays live presentations to talk about things related to mental health that we feel affect our community. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health and men. So today, I am just so blessed to have some really amazing guests to talk about mental health in men. Today's conversation, I won't be saying much. I'll just be moderating the conversation, and I'm going to open up the stage and let the brothers have their way and have their way to speak. We have um, Mr. Michael Boucher from St. Joseph's Neighborhood Center, Dr. Craig Waleed from SUNY Brockport, and Caswell Switzer Smith, who is a independent mental health counselor. I'd ask them to all come into the room, and we're going to really start this conversation. Hey, welcome, gentlemen. How are you? Hi.
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing well today, yeah.
Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you. And I'm really grateful that each of you agreed to enter into this conversation with me. And I'm just grateful that you all decided that this was the thing that you felt was important to talk about.
Yes,
so
very important.
Mike, would you say some more say to me when I talk to you about wanting to do this, what do you think was most important about this?
What do I think is most important?
About men's mental health.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's something that doesn't get a lot. It's hugely important and tends to get downplayed in some of my experience. And I'm going to be talking a little bit in the gender binary, knowing full well that this is not everyone's experience. But when we look at, say, some of the differences that people might find between traditionally people who would identify as men and people who identify as women, women would tend to seek help generally more frequently. Women tend to be more connected to each other. There are different ways that people might work out some of the things that they're going through. And I know in my own experience, many of the men around me, many of the men who formed me, many of the men I know either delay care, don't seek help as often, sometimes even struggle to name what's wrong. In terms of their inner experience, people might ask, so how are you? And that's about as far as it goes. So it's just a really important conversation, and the mental health of men is just crucial, and tends to not get as much attention in a lot of ways.
Dr. Waleed,
Yes.
Again, thank you so much for your time today. Hearing what Mike has said, what do you think is, what is your perspective on this?
Well, first and foremost, I have to say that I concur with every point that Brother Mike made. I'd like to also add to that I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that man and woman, for that matter, equals mind. And so to have a stable state of mind really is what helps to define who and or how we function in the society. But I really think that we've been conditioned as a society, and particularly those of us who identify as males from a young age, to fall into these particular categories that and to falsely define or socially constructed definitions, falsely defining manhood. And so I think the pursuit of attaining those goals or trying to personify those things that we've been conditioned to equate masculinity have served to lead many of us men down very slippery slopes that end perhaps in tragedy or poor outcomes because we failed to identify, should I say, those faulty ways of thinking and behaving, which sometimes manifest into toxic emotions.
Caswell, welcome. And The same question comes to you because I'm asking you because while, you all are men, but you are three very, very different men. And I know you come, and the reason you're here because you come from three very different perspectives. So I'm going to ask you the same question. You hear the question, when I ask you about men's mental health, what is the thing that comes to mind for you?
I would probably have to say stigma, fear. I mean, these words are very relevant in our community. I just think about how I grew up. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. Came up to Rochester because of Nazareth College, and obviously moved on to pursue my excellent education at CUSA. And I think about men, but specifically Black men, because there's a lot of trauma, right? A lot of generational issues that people deal with today that still keeps us stagnant from actually becoming healthy. I mean, I actually think about in terms of what's going on right now in terms of the coronavirus and how our population of people are mostly affected, and it's the comorbid um, things that are occurring with us, and health is something that we just don't take as serious. There's just this inherent reality that, we have to make it, the pressures of making it, but not conditioning ourselves to make sure we take care of our bodies. And, when I hear that there was an opportunity to speak about this, I gravitated. I wanted to be a part of the conversation because there's a lot of information that I think collectively we can give to our community. And I just think it's important to dispel myths and issues that, people don't take serious.
Well, thank you.
If I could just say, because as I'm listening to Cass, well, I'm drawing this analogy in my head of someone who has, say, maybe a model car, some sort of vehicle that they really adore, and I'm thinking, oftentimes people will take better care of their vehicles or their car, than they take care of their bodies. They'll put better fluids and whatever inside the machine to make sure it runs optimally, but they neglect themselves. And then going further to that car analogy, I think about how the engine is so important to the performance of the car, along with other things, but without the engine, nothing works. Yet there's something key that drives the engine, the battery, the carburetor, spark plug, and these things. And I think those parts are equivalent to or reflective or symbolic of the deeper recesses of our minds, which equates our emotional states, our psychological states, and that comes out in our performance or the things that we do or say. And oftentimes when we don't take good care of ourselves, like the car, it may look good, but it does not perform like it's supposed to. So it may leave pollution, it may cause an accident, et cetera, et cetera. Same with us. If we don't take good care of ourselves, we pollute and we cause harm and damage along the way. And oftentimes we're aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, Craig, as you were talking, and Kaz, really appreciating both of you as clinicians and also as teachers for me in the work. But these ideas of the narratives that are around masculinity and manhood, and this idea of toxic masculinity too, I think of that often in terms of what we've inherited of these roles and how we're supposed to act. And a lot of men, and this is not something that gets talked about a lot because there's, in a culture, in a sexist culture, obviously, masculinity is privileged, but a lot of this toxic masculinity has an impact on the men too. Many of us have suffered decent amounts of harm. And then, I was just on a call yesterday, a webinar with Dr. Ken Hardy on racialized trauma, and thinking, manhood obviously is not it's not a one size fits all. There are a lot of expressions of men. But when you add on race or other pieces, it was a workshop on rage and really thinking through all the losses and the unacknowledged loss, including some of the stuff that's happening during COVID and what that does and where it resides in people, literally taking decades off of people's lives. Because sometimes it's not even recognized. It doesn't manifest in the same ways. It might look like depression or numbness. And so people aren't necessarily going to be seeking help for it. And quite honestly, the whole therapeutic endeavor sometimes was not made for other communities. Like it didn't have communities of color in mind. It didn't have necessarily poor communities in mind. And so sometimes when people engage those systems, they don't find much there, or they meet with a counselor or somebody who really doesn't understand their lived experience. So I just think that's a huge piece of the conversation, is just having counselors who are attuned to a variety of things.
Something I think about, Brother Waleed, when you talked about the car, sometimes we think about certain cars. When you think about certain cars, it brings about a certain image in your mind. Like when you think about a Volkswagen Bug, you think about the type of person who drive a Bug and what a Bug is. But when you think about a GTO, that's a totally different kind of thing versus a Cadillac, right? And my thing is, with society's views of men and different kinds of men, like when I think about as a Black woman, when I was socialized to think of what a strong Black man was supposed to be, right? Do you think that some of the way we've been socialized, especially within as people of African descent within this dominant white culture, do you think that some of that has to do with how we relate to, Black men relate to mental health?
Absolutely. And I think Mike alluded to that as well as Caswell, by mentioning certain things like it may show up as depression, or people the clinicians may not understand or misdiagnose the presenting problem. These systems are not created or were not created for people outside of white communities, So I'm mentioning those examples simply to say yes to your question.
And Brother Caswell, what are some things that clinicians could do? Because I know that as someone who is here as a referring source, someone who's trying to find help for folks, a lot of people say, well, I don't know what to do. I'm doing the best that I can. This is how I was trained. If someone came to you saying that, what would you say?
So I actually wrote a paper in grad school speaking about this actual topic. And I believe it was a question of, and I'll try to do my best to speak to both areas, but it was a question of the rapport, or the Therapeutic Alliance, there you go, that a therapist creates with their client, and if it has any relevance or connection to their race. So someone who is not a minority and they're working with that population, ultimately making sure they speak to that client in a way that they can basically understand and give off this feeling that they're not there to judge them, but also they have their best interests in mind is all important thing, right? So it doesn't matter what race you are, but if you're your client, then you can make huge leaps and gains in terms of your progress and treatment. I think also in terms of what Mike shared was that there are a lot of fears that African American men have in relation to therapy. The idea that one, that I deal with constantly is confidentiality. Like it, we're speaking to people who are afraid to be vulnerable, haven't had the experience of practicing being vulnerable because of the things that because of the roles and characteristics that's been placed on them from society. And I just think that being in a position of power as a clinician therapist, it's important to just be there for your client and make sure that anything that you do, they understand that you're giving them, you're guiding them, but they make the decision, and you're just trying to, support them and give them all of the options and things that they need to consider to make an informed decision. But it's very challenging to be in a position of a clinician because you're battling those things that are obviously out there that your patient is coming in with. There's been too many times that I've worked with clients and, they're afraid to open up, because they've been taught that, that's a sign of weakness, like depending on how they grew up, where they grew up, it is a sign of weakness. And to try to get somebody to be vulnerable is extremely difficult. It is possible, but it's definitely all about the rapport that you create. And the way you create rapport is just being authentic in your delivery and making sure that you're compassionate and just, expressing that you're there for them.
Absolutely, Caswell. I agree with you there. The rapport that you create with the client or the person that you sit with is definitely the conduit that helps bring about the, I guess, the emotional healing that people are looking for. But I do think it sometimes becomes easier when people have therapists that look like them to maybe give a little more trust. But I don't think it's always necessary. But I think it's definitely easier, specifically with us as Black men. I think when we see another brother, sometimes we may feel a little more at ease. But then again, you spoke about that fear of being vulnerable, and I think that fear is what drives many of us. It shows a weakness, and it's strange that to be able to have an injury or a weakness, so-called weakness, say of a psychological matter, versus saying having an injury on your foot or your arm, and you have to wear a cast. Those two different types of injuries are perceived differently. People celebrate you if you have a broken arm; they'll give you a cast. But if you're suffering from the impact of trauma or loss or whatever, and you're having psychological challenges, somehow you're vilified or you're looked at as less than. So I think just as a lot of bells were ringing for me.
And some of my experience, especially working with men, is that I know in my own life, and I could tell a few stories, and I've just heard a lot of stories from men who, when they were boys, actually, I think so many men want connection. We value it. There's just, we want to be vulnerable. It may look different than let's say how women might be socialized to do that, but that we're seeking these things out a lot, and almost to a person. I've known men who, when they were younger, and I'm thinking especially in the 4 to 8 year old range, who actually tried to do some of this stuff and were shut down by other people, or some harm came their way. And for quite a few years, I ran a weekly group, and it happened to be in the correction facility, but with men who, to a person, would just tell stories of a lot of harm that had come their way. And for some of them, the harm had been so normalized that it actually just became how they lived, but it did stuff to them. It shut some certain down. But I know most boys could probably tell some stories of harm that happened to them, whether it's bullying, whether it's sometimes other males in their life who shut a conversation down. It could be just about anyone. It could be a teacher, and that doesn't help. Let alone some of the ways we're socialized to not speak about those things, and that there is this accumulation that starts happening. And at least my experience personally, and working with a lot of other men, is there is something very freeing about it when you're able to just say what's true, and someone's able to receive it. And that could be true about what harm has happened to you, but it also could be just true about the feelings you feel. And really, I love what you were saying, Dr. Waleed, about just living into our full selves, because I think most of us have not been able to do that for a variety of reasons. And then you add in other forms of oppression, and it gets even more complicated for anyone to do that.
And those things that you talked about, Mike, all fall under the banner of trauma,
Yes.
because you talked about harm and all these various forms of harm, and that's trauma. And research shows us that trauma impedes or stymies the development of the brain. And so that's, any one of us, and most of us have experienced some form of trauma to some degree along the way in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically those young boys who've experienced it, and that resonates with me, because I can definitely go back to my life as a young boy in the years of 4 and 8, when I'm realizing those emotional connections or those emotional needs, and I'm trying to make those connections and being shut down by various players in my life, hearing things like, oh, that's for girls,
Right.
only boys do that, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure everyone can relate to that. And some of us who are listening, who are participating in the conversation, might be guilty of even perpetuating those things until, we ourselves become a bit more aware.
Yeah. And then I also think of, so media obviously plays a role in this, and I know I've been deeply influenced, and some of this is just it's also revealing of whiteness and white supremacy, but some of the models I had coming up: Clint Eastwood, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo, military heroes. I mean, all these people who are able to, first of all, they're solitary. And that's part of white supremacy, right? It's the white solitary hero who's going to do things very individualistic, but it's the person who can endure terrible pain and actually show almost no, the goal is to show no weakness. And another is to be able to inflict pain and show no remorse. And these are informed by a lot of things. And as much as part of me says, I don't believe them, those are not how I want to live. There's something that is also true. And then of course, sexual performance is another whole arena where this gets lived out. Competition, that all these forces come into play. Capitalism, like I don't know how to separate our definitions of this stuff from all these other pieces. And so when I'm sitting with someone, there's always a lot to unpack, let alone our family of origin and the environments we're growing up in, and just these other really large forces that shape us.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And I'm thinking about, as you talk about these Eurocentric values of masculinity, and how the media plays such a big role in perpetuating them to help shape the national conscience, of people, of what a man should be and should not be. And these particular instances that you talk about, I think they ultimately help to keep people, not just men, but people, locked in a particular box or in a particular area, and afraid to explore beyond that. And so, in saying that, I think that it's important for us individuals, as men, black men, white men, or just people, to understand that men, as well as women, boys and children, all people, we are much more than these sociological constructs. And so I think someone, either Mike or Caswell, said, it's freeing, be able to just say what you think or feel without the fear of being judged. But I think that fear can only be eradicated once people become more comfortable and confident in themselves and understanding their emotional selves, their psychological selves, and their impact on the world.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know,
And go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Something I've been hearing all of you say, and I want you to speak to this. And Brother Castle, I want you to say what you're saying, but I also want you all to speak to this. Something you've all talked about was like fear of fear for confidentiality and fear to be vulnerable. I want you all to talk about how can we create spaces that are safe for men, and what can those spaces look like? I mean, physically, how can we fit? Where can those places be that we can create that would be safe for men? And what do we need? What do we need to do? What do they need to look like? And if you could make that, if money, if nothing was an object, you could just do it. What would it look like? And so, say what you're gonna say, and then and then go on into that.
Well, I was going to share something personal, so I'll pause on that, but then I'll just speak to yours first before I lose my train of thought. I think it starts with, what we do in our homes. If you have a family or you're part of a family, if you've experienced something, seeking out supports. I mean, therapy is not for everybody, right? Because there's plenty of ways of dealing with stress that comes your way. But if you've had to endure long periods of stress, and you've noticed that it's impacting, you as a person, your health, your relationships, then I encourage people to, seek out help. And obviously seek out help with someone that you feel comfortable with, because that's the key to opening up a door where you can heal. And, the idea of, therapy being a tool for people to use, it's not, I know because of the COVID virus, there's a lot of ads that you're seeing now of people doing psychotherapy via Zoom. But there still is a discrepancy in terms of ads targeting our population of people. So if there's anything that we can do, it's create more ads, encourage conversation. Right. I mean, we're speaking about a lot of stuff in terms of that are generational curses that we can change with decisions that we make here now, in the now, taking action. Number one thing, like making it a priority, like your health. We all have this time on this earth. And some people, I think, get into this mindset that they just have to keep moving, keep, doing the things that they're doing and not considering, all of the things that they've experienced, when they were younger and how it's impacting them now. The one thing I want to share personally, it was just the idea of, me as a father, me as a husband, and how I grew up in a family where self-preservation was like everything, right? Like no matter what happened to you, right, you just have to endure and persevere through it all. And I think about how it's still a journey for me, right, in terms of making my health a priority, because I think about the relationships I have with my son and how my father wasn't present and how I'm like overly excessive in terms of trying to be a good father and how there's a connection with that. But then also in terms of my relationship with my wife, and being vulnerable has always been my issue, and I'm gotten way better at it. But I just think about how, we're asked to just swallow everything that happens to us, no matter what, toughen up, you can't express that emotion. And I just think about, where does that go? That rage, right? Somebody mentioned that today. Like there is like a lot of anger unmet needs that people are experiencing. And I just think it's so important that people make their health a priority, and start by doing it in their home, by having conversations with their children, their loved ones, and also seeking help to make sure that they're capable of continuing, because it has an effect. It has an effect on our body. And I think sometimes our physical, our competence, right, makes us ignore the pain we're enduring. And it's just so important that we just try to process what has happened and try to find some resolutions, and in terms of moving on, because there's one thing that in terms of studies, but also research, the one thing that they say in terms of if you're going to be someone who is supporting someone in in the role of a therapist or a counselor, or clinician, like, you can't help anybody unless you resolve your own traumas, your own pain that you've experienced. And one thing I'll say is, my relationship with my father, we have a good one now because I made it a point to make sure I had conversations with him on the impact of him not being present in my life, or how it impacted my thoughts and views of women when he treated my mother in these specific ways, and it was insightful because he had a story to share, and we debated and had conversations about that. But that was healing, the opportunity to deal with things. And there's so many opportunities that people can have in regards to that they've experienced, that if they just allow themselves to be vulnerable.
Craig, you're muted.
See, that's scared cat as well. And for other men, and I identify with that on so many levels, but for other men, what was it that allowed you to become vulnerable and to have these conversations with your father? And before you answer, I'll just finish by saying, and I think that lots of these conversations like this are often avoided because of the emotional pain that comes from it, or that's resurrected. But what allowed you to cross that barrier?
I mean, as simple as just crying, man. Like, I grew up like repressing tears. Like, the idea of crying was so deeply as a weakness. I'm talking about, like, and before I cry, I'll run. Before I cry, I'll punch. Before I cry, like, I'll say hateful things, because I just couldn't endure this idea that, like, I was weak, so just crying, but also living in that moment, not feeling like, okay, I had that moment, it's over with. No, like, really just be in there, process the thoughts, process the feelings, allow yourself to be human, right? Like, we were designed by the maker, and part of that is to be able to release the pain that we endure and experience in a healthy way, and things that I encourage people that I've also done for myself is, through sports, like, I'm an old man now, or at least I feel old, look old, right? And basketball is not something I'm able to do as much, but something as simple as running, right? Like, never been the greatest runner, but like, I enjoy it, right? I enjoy it so much, and it's so therapeutic for me. Something as simple as also like the sauna. Like, the sauna for me is like me releasing any pain or any issues that I'm having through the sweat. So everybody's experience or journey is going to be different, but it's part of learning what helps you release what's inside of you so that you can be a better person to the people that you love or care for.
Wow, that's powerful. Thanks, man. And your story resonates with me so much because on so many levels. It's similar to my story. I grew up without my father, and without him being present in my life, I was a very angry young man, and I spent a lot of time crying, but I cried a lot in private because I didn't want anyone to see my tears, and I didn't want anyone to know that I was hurting, because that emotional pain, as we already discussed, was looked at as being weak. And story short, I think that emotional absence, that pain, that ultimately led me to prison. But while I was in prison, that time in prison, I came to that point where you're talking about, where I began to address my own trauma, my own pain, and began to really talk about it through the telephone, through visits, through letters, through self-conversation, and I'm finding ways to release and identify the cause of my problems. And I think that helped me find the right track for myself, And like you today, I find different things to do to avoid, I guess, getting stagnant or stuffing my emotions and releasing pain, But you talked about also about pain, is that I think that emotional pain, particularly the emotional pain that men feel, or anyone feels for that matter, it can manifest into physical, because I think it causes our organs to start working harder, blood pressure to go up, et cetera, and other things have to work harder. But I'm just say, man, that was a great piece you shared, and it really resonated with me. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm feeling both of you right here. Seriously, like it just, and I think almost as soon as we start talking about pain, first of all, I don't know about you, but we start talking about our fathers. We start talking about our families. Like it just so trying to get back to Melanie's question too. Like I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but I know patience is part of it. So if I'm sitting with somebody, because also as like people have worked hard with me over the years. I still remember one of my first counselors. One of the things he had to do was play some sad music and tell me to put my hand over my heart and really try to feel it. Because again, I grew up in a home where there were it was a good home, and yet affectively there was a lot that was happening, and so it didn't look like there was much happening, but I lived out of touch with who I was and what was going on. Even though I enjoyed some forms of success. And so really it took, so when someone is out of practice, using a sports metaphor, like you don't just go play at a high level right off if you haven't done it. And so like some of these basic skills of literally trying to put my hand on my chest and saying, what is it there? What does it do when you let that in? And so somebody who's both patient and compassionate, and a line that was taught to me that it just becomes truer the older I get, which is happening all the time, is pain that is not transformed is transmitted. And so if we, however it got into our life, whether it's intergenerational or whether it was like a toxic thing that was put in there, or whether it's something we've done. I know shame is a big part of stuff for a lot of men I talk to, because we've said things that we're not proud of. We've hurt people, and that's another. I think of this nun I know, Sister Margie, who runs a recovery house, and the old AA idea that we're only as sick as our secrets. And I just know a lot of men who carry a ton of secrets, but it could be a secret about their sexuality. It could be a secret about what happened in their house. Could be a secret about something that happened to them. And so, I'm cautious as we're talking too, because I don't want to just claim that all men's experience is the same. If you're a trans man, you got a very different life, possibly than maybe a cis hetero. And so really trying to find ways that each man can kind of find and claim their own manhood and what it means, and find some definitions. One last thing I'll say, well, two quick things, and then I'll be quiet for a minute. I also know many men, including myself, I've been socialized to try to fix things, which doesn't always work real well in the emotional life, because it's more just how do you hold things. as opposed to fixing them, because some of the feelings, some of the emotional states, they don't just go away. We have to hold them with each other. And I also know that a lot of us have lost communal rites of passage that help us do this. I mean, in other times and in more traditional cultures, the older men help the younger men do this work, so that they could create a container for young men to move into positions of leadership and support and thinking communally. And a lot of those things are not present for us anymore. And so things like sports or the military and some other places still have vestiges of it, but in many ways it feels a little bit shallow because it doesn't always take us to where we need to go. So these cultivations of rites of passage, however those get defined, that really help men enter this in a new way. And last thing I'll say in terms of, because I know I said it, so with some of the guys I meet with in my office, we actually don't sit facing each other. We sit side by side. Like I've had some of the most profound conversations, particularly with other men in my life, when I'm driving or when I'm sitting not looking into somebody's eyes. Like we're both looking forward, but I'm able to say things laterally that are just a little harder when I have to face somebody face to face. So I'm not saying it's better or worse, but for me, that's been a strategy sometimes working with men is just to say, if it's too much to look at us, let's just be side by side in this, and let's look at it together.
Nice stuff. If I could just speak to Melanie's question too, because I know I already spoke, but I was commenting on what Caswell said. But I think in order to have an environment for this, I would agree with many of the things that Mike and Caswell said. But I think it's important, definitely, to start in the home, and start in the home by modeling, us as men. And we can only begin modeling once we begin to learn to reframe masculinity for ourselves, and being comfortable with that. And that comfortability may not be in alignment with the cultural definition or the full cultural definition of what masculinity is. But so I think it's important for us to reframe that. And a big piece of that, we have to get rid of that no pain, no gain mentality. Because that no pain, no gain mentality to push forward, it definitely serves to harm us. And just one last thing I also like to say about that is I think what helps men, at least in my experience, go deeper in conversation is having food. Having food, having a quasi or secure environment where other people are not coming in, but food. Not for nothing, maybe a beer or a soda or something. But those things just tend to loosen up the environment, and having small groups, maybe 2 men or 3 men together. I think those intimate settings help bring about more connectivity.
Thank you, my brothers, because something that we as women, the women in your lives, right? And for and not just the women like your intimate, necessarily, depending on how you identify your intimate partners, but your sisters, your daughters, your nieces, your mothers. We see y'all, right? And we say like we want to know how to support you, and something that we know y'all like food, right? So something that, because we want to, but we don't know how to do this, right? We want to see, because we want to support you, and we always be like, we're extra, we don't always know how to do it. So we're asking, like, something we talked about. I was talking to some brothers. I said, we could do it at the barber shop. The sisters will bring the food. Y'all finish your cutting the hair. We'll clean everything up. We'll bring the food and we'll leave, right? And it's like, and just let y'all go in there and do the thing, right? And so that's the thing we want to know is my next question is, how can the women in your lives support you in helping you guys do your thing? Because we don't want to do it for you. We don't want to be extra. We don't want to add to your stress, but we want to help lift and be the helpmates in your lives, and not just like I said, not just your partners, but us as your friends and your sisters and your cousins and nieces and mothers and daughters. How can we help?
I mean, I would say personally that I think the conversation or the question is the start, right? Like asking how you can help. Obviously, every relationship, every person is going to be different. So, mine is might be different than everybody in this room. But ultimately, just asking the question, I think, would be the start. What I've found to be resonating in my experience has been validation. I I mean, I grew up a certain way that I was acknowledged, but the things that I did wasn't validated, or my thoughts weren't validated as relevant or important. Um, just, I think, also in terms of being allowed to have a voice, right? I look at things a little bit differently because for me, I'm a very introverted person. So for me, having a voice or being allowed to have a voice means something to me. It means a lot. But also just being in a position where I can share in decisions, right? I mean, some of this sounds like, relationship, goals, but I think in terms of just, when someone asks that kind of question to me, regardless if you are a friend, a sibling, father, spouse, whoever, it's just the recognition. I try very hard to not um, I try very hard not to live stereotypes or stigmas that people have. So when I say to be acknowledged, it's that. I mean, like obviously, for me, I'm in a place where I'm comfortable, and I really don't care how people perceive me, but there's a reality that I still want to be acknowledged and seen as the person that I think I am, which is hardworking, kind, compassionate, and just really willing to, give people before even thinking about myself. So, I'll have to resonate about that, reflect about that question a little bit more, but that's what come to mind for me.
Brother Mike, Brother Waleed.
Why don't you go ahead, Craig?
Okay, Mike. I was thinking about that as we talked about it yesterday, and I've been thinking about it today, and even more so right now. But I think for the women in my life, there's not a whole lot that I need from them, because I think that they've been providing me the support that I've needed from, I say, the time that I went to prison, which was in 1990. Maybe around 91, I began to identify and understand what my needs were. So I began to explicitly let it be known. I explicitly stated to the ladies in my life, or the people, be they the women or the men for that matter, the people who were in my life, but specifically the ladies in my life, I let them know what I need. And sometimes I would try to give them examples of what I need. And so at this point in my life, my wife, my mother, my sister, those are significant women in my life, and they continue to provide me the support that I need, which is mostly being able to space for me to present my emotional self, and being secure in knowing that they're not just hearing me, but they're listening to me, and they're helping me to work on whatever is is important to me in that moment. So I think, yeah, that's what they need to know. If they don't know, they're already supporting me, and they've been supporting me, and I'm very grateful.
And let me clarify my question. I mean, generally for women, like for our species, let's just be clear, for our species, all right, women generally, what do women need to know? For brothers, for guys,
yeah.
what does Venus need to know to help Mars?
Okay, so yeah, I was way off the answer. Yeah. So Mike, why don't you go then?
Go, Mike. Yeah, Mike. What does Venus need to know to help Mars?
Well, honestly, I don't buy the Venus and Mars, so that's the hard part for me.
Well, neither do I, but I was trying to find something in a quick moment to to really generalize.
I get you. Because here's one of the things. Like I know actually a lot of women have had to raise boys and men, and they've done a hell of a good job. All right, that they've done that. They've given now they may not be able to teach everything about cultural manhood, but they've actually done some of the work that men need. So women have played astounding roles in men's lives and have brought them into whole being. Now men have other things to teach young boys and men, and so that there are necessary roles, but there's also the village, and so we might get this from a variety of sources. But I mean, I'll say what's been helpful to me. Patience. Many of the women in my life have been, if we're talking in sort of heteronormative here, many of the women in my life have been very patient with me, and they didn't have to be, but they were also persistent. They didn't let me off the hook. I don't know when asked the feeling question was not an acceptable response. It was like, well, do some work to find out. And that's also just been a helpful challenge to kind of bring me deeper. But then also on this idea of persistence, I mean, I'm relatively convinced that when you sit with anyone these days and just ask them, how are you? How are you? No, how are you? Like by the time you get to the third or fourth question, most of us are onto some pretty deep stuff. And so people being persistent with me, just to not always stop with the first answer, but also to let me guide the timing too, because sometimes I'm thinking particularly in clinical circles, but also in relationships, we ask somebody to move very quickly to a very intimate place, and that's a big leap sometimes to make on the first jump, and so. But I guess holding men accountable and responsible for their own emotional lives, and then also providing some forms of support and finding the balance in that.
Yeah, I also want to just jump back in and say something, because like I'm listening to what everybody's saying, and I think about what you said and when you clarified it a little bit more, and I definitely think about the reality that, I mean, this is a journey, right? In terms of understanding what the person who's experiencing life needs themselves. So that exploration of actually getting to that point of knowing who you are and how you are, right? That's a journey in itself, right? Accepting yourself, because even with all of the trauma experience and that you've people gone through, people are still trying to determine who they are, trying to create that identity for themselves. I think those people who are capable of getting to that place, it's then their job to speak to the person who is asking them that question, how can I help, and express in ways that they can help them. Obviously, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, it's a negotiation, especially if you're but ultimately, I think it is part of the person knowing who they are, and part of that journey comes with the exploration of self, the identity, and who they want to be acknowledged as and portrayed in the community.
And but because we're getting ready to run out of time, someone submitted a question on the chat, and I want you guys to be able to respond to it before we run out of time. The question came from Fred.
Okay.
Once we get beyond the release of pain, how do we sit with the new experience and create a new system that works for connection and community? All right, I'll say the question one more time. Once we get beyond the release of pain, once we let go of our pain, how do we sit with the new experience and create a new system that works for connection and community?
I mean, I think I'll jump in and just say that um, I'm hoping that reality, if you can get to that epiphany, right, that place, that point in your life that that you're at this place, that you would continue to go down that path of making your health a priority on all levels. So your routines, your habits, what you do for others, I think all takes a part, plays a part in trying to continue something that you've started. And that's also making sure that you are mindful that relapse happen, right? Like, because as much progress that we try to make, there are times that we go backwards before continue to move forward. So being realistic to that reality, but also just realizing that it's okay to be in that place, right? Because there's some association sometimes that when you are moving forward, that there's some shame that you're supposed to stay the same, you know, the same person or be the same person for that person whoever's been hurting you or you've had negative experience. So it's okay to be a new person, especially if it's healthy and it's good for you.
Yeah, back you up on that, Caswell, because it resonates with me so much. And specifically, I think about when I came to the community from prison. One of my friends said to me, he said, "Hey, you're not the same guy that you used to be. I want that same guy back." And I had to tell him, "Hey, man, that guy's dead," you know. And I had to move forward. But yeah, it's about moving forward, consistency, and understanding that you may relapse, you may step backward, but continue to move forward and don't get down on yourself, because and in journey, sometimes we break down, sometimes we get a flat tire, we blow a gasket, but we repair ourselves and we move forward.
I would say, again, you borrowing from the AA tradition, people, places, and things. Like we need other mentors who are able to take us to the other places. But we need people. We need communities of people who can welcome us, who can help us get to the next level. We start finding us sometimes going to different places that support the new growth, and we find ourselves doing things that might support that. So maybe it could be we read different stuff, we gravitate, we might, again, beauty, joy, mystery, all of these things might start to, as we can get past some of the survival stuff and into deeper levels of ourselves. It's not always, for me, just about hard work or dealing with the garbage of life. Like sometimes it's just really learning to celebrate and be free, and that's not always something that was taught to me.
That piece about community, Mike, is so important too. Yeah, because how do we know ourselves and how do we find support in the endeavors that we're trying to pursue unless we have others around us? When others are around us, we can understand how others are experiencing us. When we have a community of people around us that believe the same and working in the same way, I think we have more physical support as well as psycho-emotional support.
Gentlemen, I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know we could go on for so much longer, but we're about out of time. But you will never, ever know how deeply I appreciated having you for this time. I want to say thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Caswell. Thank you, Brother Waleed. I mean, I honor you in this.
Thanks for the chance to do it.
Everybody, my name is Melanie Funchess. I'm with the Mental Health Association. This has been Mental Health Association Facebook Friday Live. Join us here each Friday at noon through Mental Health Awareness Month, where we will come and share with you different subjects related to mental health. Join us here on Fridays live at noon. See you soon. Bye.